Harold Peterson sat by the window of his small bedroom, watching the maple trees outside dance in the autumn breeze. At 99 years old, his hands weren't steady anymore, but his mind remained sharp as a tack. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the old black and white photograph he held. 5 young men in uniform, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, smiling despite what lay ahead of them. His weathered finger traced the face of the man standing next to his younger self, Jimmy Sullivan, his best friend, the boy from down the street who became his brother in the foxholes of Europe. "Grandpa, are you ready for lunch?" Harold looked up to see his great-granddaughter Lily standing in the doorway. At 22, she had her grandmother's eyes and a gentleness that reminded him of his late wife. "Just remembering," Harold said, carefully placing the photograph back in the wooden box on his nightstand. Lily walked over and glanced at the picture before Harold closed the lid. "Is that from the war?" Harold nodded. "June 1944, right before we shipped out." "Who are they?" Lily asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. Harold pointed to each face. "That's me, of course. Then Bobby Chen, Frank O'Malley, Jimmy Sullivan, and Tom Wilson." He paused at Jimmy's face. "Jimmy was my best friend since we were knee-high to grasshoppers." Lily tilted her head. "You've never talked much about him." Harold's eyes clouded. "Some things are hard to talk about even after all these years." "What happened to him?" Lily asked softly. Harold closed his eyes briefly. He didn't come home. The silence that followed felt heavy with 75 years of unspoken grief. "Do you know where he's buried?" Lily finally asked. "Arlington," Harold replied. "At least that's what they told us. I never—" His voice trailed off. Lily's eyes widened. "You never visited his grave?" Harold shook his head slowly. "I always meant to. Time just slipped away." That evening, after Harold had gone to bed, Lily sat at her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. She had recently graduated with a degree in history, and her research skills were sharp. Within an hour, she had located James Sullivan's grave at Arlington National Cemetery. The next morning, she placed a printout on the breakfast table as Harold sipped his coffee. "What's this?" he asked, reaching for his reading glasses. "Jimmy's resting place," Lily said quietly. Section 39, Grave 2187. Harold stared at the paper for a long moment. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup. "I've been thinking, Grandpa," Lily continued. "I have 2 weeks before my new job starts. What if we went to Arlington together?" Harold looked up, surprise written across his face. "Arlington? That's all the way in Virginia." "We could fly," Lily suggested. "Or take the train if you prefer. I already checked, and there are services for veterans who want to visit." "I don't know, Lily," Harold said, his voice uncertain. "It's been 75 years. "That's why it matters," Lily replied gently. "Don't you think Jimmy would want you to come?" The question hung in the air between them. 3 days later, Harold found himself sitting in the passenger seat of Lily's old Honda as they drove to the airport. He clutched a small duffel bag on his lap, inside which he had carefully packed the photograph and Jimmy's letters, preserved in their original envelopes. "You doing okay, Grandpa?" Lily asked, glancing over at him. Harold nodded, though his heart was racing. After 7 decades of avoiding this journey, he was finally on his way to say goodbye to Jimmy. The flight was uncomfortable for Harold's arthritic joints, but he didn't complain. As the plane descended toward Washington, D.C., he gazed out the window at the patchwork of fields and suburbs below. "I never thought I'd do this," he admitted to Lily. "Always figured I'd be buried before I ever visited Jimmy." Lily squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you." They spent the night in a hotel near the cemetery. Harold barely slept, his mind swimming with memories long suppressed. Jimmy teaching him to throw a curveball in the vacant lot behind their houses. Jimmy slipping him answers in algebra class. Jimmy holding him up after shrapnel tore through his leg, dragging him to safety while bullets sprayed the ground around them. The next morning dawned clear and cool. A volunteer from the Veteran Support Network met them at the cemetery entrance with a wheelchair for Harold. "I can walk," Harold protested. "It's a big place, Grandpa." Lily reminded him gently. We can always get up and walk when we reach the right section. Harold reluctantly settled into the wheelchair. As Lily pushed him along the paved paths between rows of identical white headstones, a lump formed in his throat. So many, he murmured. So many boys. The volunteer led them to section 39. Harold insisted on standing as they approached grave 21A7. Leaning heavily on his cane with Lily's steadying hand on his elbow, he shuffled forward until he stood before the simple white marker. James T. Sullivan, Private, 1st Classes, Army, World War, 2 May 12th, 1925 August 15th, 1944. Harold stood silently, his lips pressed together in a tight line. 75 years of guilt, grief, and unspoken words welled up inside him. I'll give you some time, the volunteer said quietly, stepping away. Lily started to follow, but Harold caught her hand. Stay, he whispered. Please. For several minutes, Harold simply stood there, leaning on his cane, looking down at the name carved in stone. Then slowly, he began to speak. Hello, Jimmy, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Took me long enough, didn't it? Lily remained silent beside him, her hand on his shoulder. I should have come sooner, Harold continued. I promised your ma I would, you know. But every time I thought about it, I'd remember that day, and I just couldn't face you. He took a deep, shuddering breath. You saved my life, and I couldn't save yours. That's a hard thing to live with for 75 years. Carefully, Harold reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the photograph, protected in a plastic sleeve. Remember this? Right before we shipped out, you said we looked so serious, made us all laugh right as the camera clicked. A ghost of a smile crossed Harold's face. You always could make anybody laugh, even when things were at their worst. Harold lowered himself carefully to one knee, Lily helping to steady him. He placed the photograph against the headstone. You know what I remember most? That night in the foxhole outside St. Lo, when it was raining so hard we thought we might drown before the Germans ever got us. You told me all about the house you were going to build when you got home. Drew the whole thing in the mud with a stick. Said you'd have a room for me whenever I needed it. Harold's voice broke. I got to have a life, Jimmy. A wife, children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren, all because of what you did. And you never got to build that house. Tears slid down Harold's weathered cheeks. Lily knelt beside him, her own eyes wet. This is my great-granddaughter, Lily, Harold said, gesturing toward her. She's the one who found you. Smart as a whip, just like you were. A slight breeze rustled the leaves of a nearby oak tree. Harold fell silent for a moment, listening. You know, I've carried you with me every day since August 15th, 1944, he finally continued. Everything I did, every good moment I had, I'd think, Jimmy should be here for this. When I held my son for the first time, I thought of you. When I walked my daughter down the aisle, I thought of you. Every Christmas, every birthday, you were always there, in the back of my mind. Harold reached out, his fingers tracing the letters of Jimmy's name. I hope wherever you are, you know that. I hope you know you weren't forgotten, not for a single day. With Lily's help, Harold struggled back to his feet. He stood straight, shoulders back, and slowly raised his right hand in a formal salute. Goodbye, my friend, he said softly. At ease, soldier. At ease. As they turned to go, a man in the uniform of a cemetery groundskeeper approached. He was maybe in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face. He nodded respectfully toward Harold's veteran cap. Excuse me, sir, he said. I couldn't help noticing you're visiting Private Sullivan. Mind if I ask how you knew him? Harold looked at the man curiously. He was my best friend. We served together in the 29th Infantry Division. The groundskeeper's eyes widened. You served with James Sullivan? In the 29th? Yes, Harold replied. Why do you ask? The man's face broke into an expression of astonishment. Sir, you're not going to believe this, but my name is Robert Sullivan. James Sullivan was my grandfather. Harold stared at the groundskeeper, his mouth slightly open. The words echoed in his ears. James Sullivan was my grandfather. Your grandfather? Harold repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Robert Sullivan nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. Yes, sir. I never knew him, of course. He died before my father was even born. Harold gripped his cane tighter, suddenly feeling unsteady. Lily moved closer to support him. Maybe we should sit down, Grandpa, she suggested gently. Robert gestured to a nearby bench beneath the shade of an oak tree. Please let me help you. Together, Lily and Robert helped Harold to the bench. The old veteran's mind was reeling. After 75 years of carrying Jimmy in his memories, to suddenly meet his friend's grandson felt like something from a dream. I don't understand, Harold said once he was seated. How are you here right now, today of all days? Robert sat beside him. I've worked here at Arlington for nearly 30 years. It's my way of staying connected, I guess, to a grandfather I never knew. He glanced at Jimmy's grave. I wasn't even supposed to be here today. I swapped shifts because another groundskeeper got sick. Harold shook his head in disbelief. If that isn't the hand of fate, I don't know what is. May I ask your name, sir? Robert asked. Harold Peterson. Robert's eyes widened. Harold Peterson? My grandmother used to mention your name. Said you and my grandfather were like brothers. We were, Harold said softly. From grade school until... He gestured toward the white headstone. My grandmother held out hope for years that you might visit, Robert said. She passed in 1987, Harold bowed his head. I'm sorry I never came. I meant to, but the guilt was too much. Jimmy died saving me, you see. Pushed me into a ditch and took the bullet that was meant for me. Robert was quiet for a moment. We never knew the exact circumstances, he finally said. Just that he died in action in France. Saint Lo, Harold said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. August 15th, 1944. We were clearing a farmhouse we thought was empty. Turned out it wasn't. Lily sat on Harold's other side, listening intently. This was a story she had never heard. A part of her great-grandfather's life he had kept locked away. My grandmother received a few of his letters, Robert said, and his personal effects. But no one could tell her much about who he really was, what he was like. The army just sent a form letter and a flag. Harold looked at Robert, really looked at him. Now that he knew, he could see traces of Jimmy in the man's face. The same strong jawline, the same slight crease between the eyebrows. He was the best man I ever knew, Harold said. Brave without being foolish. Kind without being soft. Could make anybody laugh, even in the worst situations. He wanted to be an architect after the war. Used to draw buildings on any scrap of paper he could find. Robert's face lit up. We have some of his drawings. My father kept them in a box. I never knew he wanted to be an architect. Harold smiled, a memory surfacing. He designed a house once, said he'd build it when he got home. Had a special room for me whenever I needed it. Said I'd probably need a place to escape after I married my girl back home. Did you? Robert asked. Marry your girl back home? Harold nodded. Betty Lou Winters. We were married for 61 years before she passed. 61 years, Robert repeated. That's amazing. Every good day I had, Harold said, his voice growing husky. Every happy moment with my family, I owed to Jimmy, and I couldn't even bring myself to visit his grave. You're here now, Robert said gently. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a moment, the late morning sun warming their faces. In the distance, a bugler began playing taps for another funeral service. I just can't believe it, Harold finally said. All these years, and I meet you by chance. Maybe not by chance, Robert suggested. My grandmother always said Jimmy had a way of making the impossible happen. Harold laughed softly. That he did. Mr. Peterson, Robert said hesitantly, would you consider meeting the rest of the family? My father, Jimmy's son, is still alive. He's 81 now. Jimmy never got to meet him. Harold's eyes widened. Jimmy had a son? Robert nodded. My grandmother was pregnant when he shipped out. Dad was born 3 months after that telegram arrived. I didn't know, Harold whispered. The weight of this revelation pressed on his chest. Jimmy had a son he never met, a grandson who worked at his grave, a whole family that had grown from the life cut short at 19. Dad lives about 20 minutes from here, Robert continued. I know he'd love to meet someone who actually knew his father. Harold looked at Lily, uncertainty in his eyes. "We don't fly home until Sunday," she said. "That's 3 more days." Harold turned back to Robert. "I'd be honored to meet your father and anyone else in the family who might want to meet an old man who knew Jimmy." Robert smiled broadly. "That's wonderful. Let me make a call." As Robert stepped away to use his phone, Harold gazed back at Jimmy's headstone. The photograph he had placed there caught the sunlight, the 5 young faces frozen in time. "I can't believe it, Jimmy," he murmured. "Your family. After all these years." Lily squeezed his hand. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" Harold nodded slowly. "I think I am. For the first time in a very long time, I think I really am." Robert returned, his face alight with excitement. "My father can't believe it. He's gathering everyone at his house this evening, whoever can make it on short notice." "Would that be all right?" "Yes," Harold said, surprising himself with his eagerness. "Yes, that would be just fine." Robert helped them back to the entrance of the cemetery where their taxi was waiting. They exchanged phone numbers, and Robert promised to pick them up at their hotel at 5 o'clock. Back in their hotel room, Harold sat on the edge of his bed, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts, Grandpa," Lily said, setting a cup of tea beside him. "I keep thinking about all the years I wasted," Harold replied. "I could have known Jimmy's family all this time. Could have told his son about his father." "You can't change the past," Lily said gently. "But you're here now. That's what matters." Harold nodded, taking a sip of tea. "I need to look through that old box again. There are things Jimmy's family should have." From his duffel bag, he carefully removed the wooden box that had traveled with him from home. Inside were Jimmy's letters, a few photographs, and a small leather pouch he hadn't opened in decades. "What's in there?" Lily asked, pointing to the pouch. Harold's fingers trembled as he loosened the drawstring. "Something I should have given to his family long ago." From the pouch, he pulled out a tarnished set of dog tags and a small, worn pocket knife. "The Army sent his official tags to his mother," Harold explained, "but we all carried spares. When they found him, I asked if I could keep these. The knife was a gift from his father. Jimmy always had it with him." Lily watched as her great-grandfather carefully polished the dog tags with the edge of his shirt, revealing the stamped letters of Jimmy's name and service number. "His son should have these," Harold said firmly. At precisely 5 o'clock, Robert arrived at their hotel. Harold had dressed in his best shirt and tie, his veteran's cap placed carefully on his head. The wooden box and leather pouch were tucked safely in a small bag at his side. "Ready?" Robert asked as he helped Harold into the passenger seat of his car. "As I'll ever be," Harold replied. They drove through the Virginia suburbs, eventually turning into a quiet neighborhood of modest homes with well-kept yards. Robert pulled into the driveway of a blue 2-story house with white trim. Several cars were already parked along the street. "Dad's place," Robert explained. "He's been here since 1970. Harold's heart pounded as they approached the front door. Before Robert could even knock, it swung open to reveal an elderly man with silver hair and bright blue eyes. Jimmy's eyes. "Dad," Robert said, "this is Harold Peterson. He served with Grandpa Jimmy." The man stared at Harold for a long moment, then extended a trembling hand. "William Sullivan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My father died 3 months before I was born." Harold took William's hand in both of his. "Your father was the finest man I ever knew," he said, "and I've been carrying him in my heart for 75 years. William's eyes filled with tears. "Please," he said, stepping back, "come in. Meet the family my father never got to know." As Harold crossed the threshold, supported by Lily on one side and Robert on the other, he felt as though he was finally laying down a burden he had carried for 3/4 of a century. And somewhere, he was certain, Jimmy Sullivan was smiling. The living room of William Sullivan's house was filled with people. As Harold stepped inside with Lily at his side, conversations quieted and all eyes turned toward him. For a moment, the old veteran felt overwhelmed, but then William gently guided him to a comfortable armchair that had clearly been reserved for him. "Everyone," William said, his voice carrying across the room. "This is Harold Peterson. He served with my father in World War II. He was there when it happened." A woman about William's age stepped forward. "I'm Margaret, William's wife," she said, taking Harold's hand. "Thank you for coming. This means more than you can imagine." One by one, the family members approached to introduce themselves. There were William's children, Robert, whom Harold had already met at the cemetery, and his sister Nancy. There were grandchildren ranging from teenagers to adults in their 30s, and even a few great-grandchildren, toddlers who darted between the legs of the adults, unaware of the significance of the moment. 4 generations, Harold said in wonder as a young mother introduced her 6-month-old baby boy. Jimmy would have been so proud. Did you know him well? Asked Nancy, who had Jimmy's wavy hair and easy smile. Like a brother, Harold replied. We grew up on the same street in Pennsylvania. Went to school together, played baseball together, double-dated, enlisted together. His voice softened. Did everything together until the end. William settled on the couch across from Harold. Dad, show him the box. William nodded and left the room, returning moments later with a worn metal box, the kind soldiers once used to store cigarettes. He handed it to Harold with reverence. These are the things they sent back, William explained. His personal effects, not much. A few letters he'd received but hadn't opened yet. Some drawings. His watch. I've kept them all these years. Harold opened the box carefully. On top was a pocket watch with a dent in the case. He picked it up, running his thumb over the smooth metal. This was from his grandfather. Harold said softly. He was always checking it. Our sergeant used to get on him about it. He set the watch aside and looked at the letters. These would be from your mother, he said to William. Jimmy treasured every letter from home. He'd read them over and over. Beneath the letters were several folded sheets of paper. Harold opened one to reveal a detailed sketch of a 2-story house with a wide front porch. His dream house, Harold said, a smile spreading across his face. He used to talk about it all the time. Said he'd build it after the war. William leaned forward, studying the drawing. I never knew what these were. My mother told me he liked to draw, but I didn't understand what I was looking at. He wanted to be an architect, Harold explained. Had a real talent for it, too. This porch here, he pointed to the detailed drawing. He said this was where he'd sit in the evenings with his family, watching the sun go down. The house I grew up in had a porch like that, William said, his voice catching. My mother never said anything about these drawings. She must have built it that way on purpose, Harold nodded, understanding filling him. She gave him his dream in a way. He reached for his own small bag and pulled out the leather pouch. I brought something for you, he said to William. Something that should have been yours long ago. William accepted the pouch with trembling hands. When he opened it and saw the dog tags and pocket knife, tears filled his eyes. These were his? He asked, his voice barely audible. The knife was from his father, your grandfather, Harold explained. He carried it everywhere. The tags are his spare set. I've kept them safe all these years, but they belong with you now. William closed his fingers around the items, pressing them against his chest. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the soft sounds of the children playing in another part of the house. What was he like? Nancy finally asked, breaking the silence. We've always wondered. Harold looked around at the expectant faces. These people knew Jimmy only as a name, a faded photograph, a folded flag. They'd lived their lives in the shadow of his sacrifice, but they'd never known the man himself. He was the kind of friend everyone wishes they had, Harold began, loyal to a fault. Quick with a joke, stubborn as an old mule when he thought he was right. He smiled at a memory. One time we were about 14, and Jimmy decided we should build a boat. Not a little raft for the creek, mind you, but a proper boat. Spent all summer collecting scrap wood and hammering it together in his backyard. His father said it would sink like a stone, but Jimmy wouldn't listen. Did it float? Asked one of the teenage grandchildren. Harold chuckled. For about 30 seconds. Then it went down like the Titanic. But Jimmy just laughed, soaking wet, and said, well, now we know what not to do next time. The family laughed, and Harold could see them trying to fit this story into their understanding of the solemn figure from the single photograph most of them had grown up seeing. He loved music, Harold continued. Could play the harmonica like nobody's business. Used to drive everyone crazy in the barracks, practicing at all hours. Robert disappeared into another room and returned with an old harmonica in a tarnished case. Is this it? It was in his things, but none of us could play it. Harold took the instrument with reverence. Yes, this is it. He held it for a moment, then handed it back. He'd play this song, I'll Be Seeing You. It was popular back then. Reminded us all of home. What else? William asked eagerly. What else do you remember? Harold thought for a moment. He had the worst handwriting you ever saw. His letters home must have been a challenge to read. William smiled. My mother used to say deciphering his letters was like breaking a secret code. And he could eat more than anyone I knew, Harold added. Always hungry. We used to joke that the army recruited him just to test how much one soldier could eat. As the evening progressed, Harold shared story after story. The time Jimmy talked their way out of trouble with the military police in London. The Christmas Eve in 1943 when he organized a makeshift celebration for their unit, somehow producing candy for everyone. The way he never complained, even during the worst of times. With each story, Jimmy seemed to come alive in the room. Harold could see it in the faces of the family, the gradual transformation as they began to know the man behind the name, to hear his laugh through Harold's imitation, to understand his dreams through the sketches and stories. During a lull in the conversation, while some of the family went to the kitchen to bring out coffee and dessert, William sat close to Harold. What happened that day? He asked quietly. If it's not too painful to talk about. Harold took a deep breath. He had carried this story inside him for so long, had relived it in his nightmares, had never spoken it aloud to anyone. But now, facing Jimmy's son, he knew the time had come. We were in northern France, he began, his voice low. Our unit was clearing houses in a small village. Most of the Germans had retreated, but there were still snipers. Jimmy and I were checking a farmhouse that looked abandoned. The room had gone quiet again, everyone listening intently. Jimmy went through the door first. Always did, he was fearless that way. The room looked empty, but as I stepped in behind him, he spotted something. A German soldier hiding in the corner, rifle raised. Harold's hands trembled slightly in his lap. He didn't hesitate, just shouted, "Get down!" and pushed me hard. I fell backward through the doorway as the shot rang out. By the time our guys got to the German, it was too late for Jimmy. William's eyes were wet, but he nodded for Harold to continue. The medic said it was quick. He didn't suffer. I held his hand anyway, told him he'd be okay, that we'd go home soon and he'd build that house of his. Harold's voice broke. He smiled at me, said something I couldn't quite hear, and then he was gone. Margaret quietly handed Harold a handkerchief. He hadn't realized he was crying. I wrote to your mother, Harold said to William. The official notification wouldn't come for weeks, and I wanted her to hear it from someone who was there, who cared about him. I don't know if my letter reached her before the telegram. It did, William said. She kept it all her life. Said it was the only thing that helped her through those first terrible months. Knowing that someone who loved him was with him at the end. Harold felt a weight lifting from his chest. All these years he had carried the guilt of surviving, the pain of losing his friend, the regret of not visiting the grave sooner. But sitting here surrounded by the living legacy of Jimmy Sullivan, the family that had grown from the life he had sacrificed his own to protect, Harold finally began to understand Jimmy's last act had not just saved Harold's life. It had preserved all the generations that would come from both of them. In this room were the grandchildren and great-grandchildren that might never have existed without both men's choices that day in France. Thank you, Harold said softly, looking around at all of them. Thank you for letting me meet you, for letting me see what Jimmy's life became even after it ended. Lily, who had been quietly watching from beside Harold, leaned over and squeezed his hand. In her eyes he could see that she understood what this moment meant to him. No, William said, his voice firm. Thank you for bringing our father back to us. The evening stretched long into the night. No one wanted it to end, not Harold, who had waited 75 years to share these memories, and not the Sullivan family, who were finally getting to know the man who had given them their future at the cost of his own. As midnight approached, William noticed Harold's energy beginning to fade. The old veteran's eyes remained bright and engaged, but his shoulders had begun to slump with fatigue. We should let you rest, William said gently. It's been quite a day. Harold nodded reluctantly. These old bones aren't what they used to be. Would you consider coming back tomorrow? Nancy asked. There's so much more we want to hear. Harold looked at Lily, who nodded encouragingly. We'd be honored, Harold replied. If you're sure we're not imposing. Imposing? Robert laughed. Mr. Peterson, you've given us a gift no one else in the world could give. We'd keep you here for a week if we could. As they prepared to leave, William pulled Harold aside. I have something to show you tomorrow, he said quietly. Something I think you should see. Harold raised an eyebrow in question, but William just smiled. Get some rest. I'll pick you up at your hotel around 10. The drive back to the hotel was quiet, both Harold and Lily lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were back in their room that Lily broke the silence. "How are you feeling, Grandpa?" she asked, helping him with his shoes. Harold sat on the edge of the bed, looking thoughtful. "Like I've been carrying a boulder for 75 years and someone just lifted it off my shoulders." "They loved the stories," Lily said. "You could see it in their faces." "Jimmy was coming alive for them," Harold agreed. "I could almost feel him in the room with us." That night, for the first time in decades, Harold slept without dreaming of exploding farmhouses or his friend's final smile. Instead, he dreamed of baseball games in vacant lots, of summer evenings on front porches, of two boys with their whole lives ahead of them. Morning came with golden sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains. Harold woke feeling more rested than he had in years. "You look 10 years younger," Lily remarked as they ate breakfast in the hotel restaurant. "I feel it," Harold admitted. "Funny how sharing a burden can make it lighter, even after all this time." At precisely 10 o'clock, William arrived at the hotel. To Harold's surprise, he was alone. "Just us today?" Harold asked as he settled into the passenger seat. "For this morning, yes," William replied. "The whole family will gather again this evening. But first, there's something I want to show you privately." They drove through the Virginia countryside, eventually turning onto a tree-lined lane that led to a residential area Harold hadn't seen before. The houses were older here, built in the post-war boom of the late 1940s and early 1950s. William slowed the car in front of a white, two-story house with green shutters and a wide front porch that wrapped around one side. A massive oak tree dominated the front yard, and flower beds lined the walkway to the front steps. "Whose house is this?" Harold asked, something familiar tugging at his memory. "Mine," William said simply. "The house I grew up in. The house my mother built in 1947. Harold stared at the house, his mind racing back to the sketch he had seen the night before. Jimmy's dream house. The resemblance was unmistakable, from the wraparound porch to the dormer windows on the second floor. "She built it," Harold whispered. "She actually built Jimmy's house." William nodded, his eyes glistening. "After you showed me that drawing last night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mother never told me the house was based on Dad's design. She just said it was the house she'd always wanted. May I?" Harold gestured toward the house. "Of course." With Lily and William supporting him on either side, Harold made his way up the walkway and climbed the 3 steps to the porch. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at the view. The same view Jimmy had imagined for his future family. "He used to talk about sitting right here," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. "Watching his children play in the yard, growing old with your mother. Would you like to see inside?" William asked. Harold nodded, unable to speak. The interior of the house had been updated over the years, but the bones of it, the layout, the flow from room to room, matched Jimmy's vision with uncanny accuracy. The living room with its large picture window, the dining room that opened onto the back garden, even the built-in bookshelves that Jimmy had sketched so carefully. "Your mother must have memorized every detail of his drawings," Harold said in wonder. "She kept them under her pillow for months after she got the news," William explained. "Later, when she decided to build a house, she worked with an architect who helped her turn the sketches into proper blueprints." In the hallway hung a framed photograph of a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, holding a baby. "My mother and me," William explained, "taken about 6 months after Dad died." Harold studied the photograph. "She was so young." 19, William confirmed. "The same age as Dad when he died. She never remarried, you know. Said she'd had her great love even if it was brief." They continued through the house, ending in a small study off the living room. Here, William opened a cabinet to reveal a display case. Inside was a folded American flag in a triangular case, Jimmy's Purple Heart and other medals, and several framed photographs. "My little shrine to a father I never knew," William said. "I've spent my whole life trying to piece together who he was, collecting whatever scraps of information I could find. And now here you are, filling in all the missing pieces." Harold's gaze was drawn to one particular photograph, a group of young men in uniform, arms around each other's shoulders. It was the same photo he had placed on Jimmy's grave just yesterday. "Where did you get this?" he asked, pointing to the picture. "It was among Dad's effects," William said. The army sent back what they could find. Harold leaned closer, studying the 5 young faces frozen in time. Bobby Chen, Frank O'Malley, me, Jimmy, and Tom Wilson, he recited. This was taken the day before we shipped out. You're in this photo? William asked, surprised. Harold pointed to the skinny young man standing next to Jimmy. That's me at 19. Hard to believe, isn't it? William looked back and forth between the young soldier in the photograph and the 99-year-old man standing before him. I can see it in the eyes, he said finally. They haven't changed. What happened to the others? Lily asked gently. Harold's face grew solemn. Bobby made it home but died in the 50s, car accident. Frank was killed at the Battle of the Bulge, just a few months after Jimmy. Tom survived the war but was never the same.
Spent his life battling what they now call PTSD. Died in the 70s. And you've outlived them all, William observed. Sometimes I wonder why, Harold admitted.
Why I got to have a long life when they didn't. William placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. Because someone needed to remember. Someone needed to tell their stories. And now you've passed Jimmy's story to us, and we'll keep it alive. They spent another hour in the house with William showing Harold old family albums and mementos. Then they drove to a small cemetery not far away. My mother, William explained as they walked among the headstones. She asked to be buried here instead of Arlington. Said she wanted to be close to home where Dad would have wanted to be. They stopped before a simple headstone. Eleanor Grace Sullivan, 1925, 1987, beloved mother, grandmother and friend until we meet again. She never stopped loving him, William said quietly. Never stopped missing him. Harold knelt with difficulty and placed his hand on the cool stone. Hello, Eleanor, he said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long to come. But Jimmy's memory was in good hands with you. As they drove back toward William's house, where the family would gather again that evening, Harold was quiet, lost in his thoughts. Penny for your thoughts, Lily said, echoing her words from the day before. Harold looked out at the passing landscape. I'm thinking about time, he said slowly. How it can feel so long and so short at the same time. 75 years since I lost Jimmy, but sitting with his family, looking at his house, it feels like yesterday. Time is strange that way, William agreed from the driver's seat. I'm also thinking about that box in the back seat, Harold added, gesturing to an old cardboard box William had retrieved from his attic before they left the house. William smiled. Just a few more of Dad's things I thought you might want to see. Some letters he wrote home that my mother saved, a few more drawings. I never imagined this, Harold said, shaking his head in wonder. When Lily convinced me to finally visit Jimmy's grave, I thought I was just saying goodbye. I never thought I'd be saying hello to a whole family I never knew existed. When they arrived back at William's current home, several cars were already parked outside. The family had returned, eager for more stories, more connections to their past. As they walked toward the house, William said, There's one more surprise. My sister Nancy managed to track down a few people who knew Dad from school, classmates who are still alive. They're coming this evening to meet you. Harold stopped in his tracks. More connections, he said softly. More threads leading back to Jimmy. Is that okay? William asked, suddenly concerned. Harold nodded, a smile spreading across his weathered face. More than okay. It's a miracle. As they reached the porch, the front door flew open and one of Jimmy's great-grandchildren, a boy of about 8, bounded out. Mr. Peterson, he called excitedly. Grandpa said you know baseball stories about great-grandpa Jimmy. Will you tell me? Harold laughed, feeling lighter than he had in decades. I sure will, son. Your great-grandpa could throw a curveball that would make your head spin. The boy's eyes widened. Really? Could you teach me? Harold glanced at Lily, who smiled encouragingly. Well, these old arms aren't what they used to be, he admitted. But I think between the two of us we might just figure it out. As they entered the house filled with Jimmy's descendants, Harold felt his friend's presence more strongly than ever, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living legacy that continued through each person in this family. And for the first time since that terrible day in France, Harold felt not just guilt for surviving, but profound gratitude that he had lived long enough to see this day. The second gathering at William's house was even larger than the first. Word had spread quickly, and relatives who lived farther away had dropped everything to come meet the man who knew their Jimmy. Harold found himself at the center of attention again, seated in the same comfortable armchair, with Lily never far from his side. This time, there were new faces, 3 elderly people in their 90s, brought by their children and grandchildren. Nancy introduced them one by one. This is Dorothy Wilson. She sat behind Dad in English class all through high school, Nancy said, helping a white-haired woman settle into a seat near Harold. Dorothy's eyes lit up. Jimmy Sullivan. I had such a crush on him. He was always passing notes to Harold here instead of paying attention to the teacher. Or to me. Harold chuckled. I remember. You used to kick the back of his chair when he ignored you. And this is Frank Morelli, Nancy continued, introducing a thin man with thick glasses. He played baseball with Dad. Second base to Jimmy's shortstop, Frank said, his voice still strong despite his years. We turned more double plays than anyone in the county. And Joe Peterson, Nancy finished. No relation to you, but Joe, Harold exclaimed, recognition dawning. Joe from the corner store. The third elderly visitor grinned, revealing a set of dentures. That's right. My family owned the grocery where you boys would spend your pennies on candy. Jimmy always went for the licorice. Still can't stand the stuff myself, Harold said, wrinkling his nose. But Jimmy could eat it by the pound. For the next hour, the 4 old friends reminisced about a world long vanished, about street games and school dances, about swimming holes and first cars, about a time before the shadow of war fell across their young lives. The Sullivan family listened in rapt attention, hearing stories of Jimmy as a child, as a teenager, as a young man full of dreams and mischief. Remember when he climbed the water tower? Joe asked, eyes twinkling. Harold groaned. How could I forget? The whole town was in an uproar. What happened? Asked one of the teenage great-grandchildren, leaning forward eagerly. Your great-grandfather, Harold explained, decided on his 17th birthday that he needed to paint his name on the town water tower. Got about halfway up before the police showed up. They called the fire department to get him down. Was he in trouble? The teenager asked. Grounded for a month, Harold confirmed. Had to work at the local garage to pay for the fire department call-out. But he said it was worth it because Eleanor, your great-grandmother, was so impressed by his daring that she finally agreed to go out with him. William laughed. Mom never told that story. She always said they started dating after he helped her with a flat tire. Well, the flat tire came later, Dorothy chimed in, but it was the water tower incident that first caught her eye. She told me so herself. As the evening progressed, they went through the box William had retrieved from his attic. Inside were letters Jimmy had written home, full of optimism and plans for the future, carefully avoiding mentions of danger or fear that might worry his loved ones. There were more drawings, sketches of landscapes he'd seen in England and France, portraits of his fellow soldiers, and more detailed plans for the house he would never build. At the bottom of the box was a small notebook, its cover worn and stained. I've never opened this, William admitted, turning it over in his hands. It seemed too personal somehow. Harold recognized it immediately. His journal. He wrote in it every night, no matter how tired he was. William hesitated, then offered it to Harold. Would you read some of it to us? Harold accepted the journal with trembling hands. To read Jimmy's private thoughts after all these years felt both sacred and intrusive. He carefully opened to a random page in the middle. June 12, 1944, he read aloud. Just got word we're shipping out soon. No one says it, but we all know it's for the invasion. The guys are writing letters home, trying to sound brave. Harold keeps checking and double-checking his gear like it'll protect him from whatever's coming. Maybe it will. Got a letter from Eleanor today. She's worried but trying not to show it. She enclosed a picture of her in the new dress she bought for graduation. I'm keeping it in my breast pocket, close to my heart. When I get scared, and I do get scared no matter what I tell her, I touch that pocket and remember what I'm fighting for. I drew more plans for our house today. Harold laughed and said I'm building a mansion, not a house. Maybe he's right, but Eleanor deserves a mansion. I've added a nursery. Feels like tempting fate to plan that far ahead, but a man needs dreams out here. Harold's voice faltered. He turned to a later entry. August 10, 1944. We cleared another village today. The locals came out of hiding when they realized we were Americans, not Germans. An old woman gave me a loaf of bread as thanks. I shared it with the squad, but saved a piece for Harold, who was on patrol. He's been looking out for me since we were kids. Now I look out for him too. I had that dream again last night. The one where I'm back home, sitting on the porch of our house watching the sunset with Eleanor. There's a child playing in the yard. I can never see if it's a boy or girl, but in the dream I know it's ours. It feels so real that waking up to the sound of artillery is like dying a little each time. We've been hearing rumors about heading toward St. Lo. Heavy fighting expected. I'm not writing that in my letters home, of course. To Eleanor, I'm always somewhere safe, always fine, always coming home soon. And I will come home. I have to believe that. Harold closed the journal, unable to continue. The next entries would be the last Jimmy ever wrote. The room was silent except for the soft sounds of sniffling as many of the family members wiped away tears. He never knew, William said softly. He never knew about me. He knew about the possibility, Harold said. He mentioned the nursery in his plans and in his journal. He was planning for you even if he didn't know you were already on the way. William nodded, trying to compose himself. I've spent my whole life wondering about him, wondering if he would have been proud of me. He would have been, Harold said firmly. No doubt about it. Look at what you've built, this family, this legacy. Jimmy lives on in all of you? Harold turned to Lily. Would you get the other thing from my bag? The envelope. Lily retrieved a large manila envelope and handed it to her great-grandfather. Harold opened it carefully and pulled out a sketch, yellowed with age but well preserved. Jimmy wasn't the only one who liked to draw, though he was much better at it, Harold explained. I made this the week before we lost him, never showed it to anyone. He handed the sketch to William. It was a portrait of Jimmy, not in his uniform but in civilian clothes, sitting on the steps of a porch. The same porch that would later be built on William's childhood home. In the drawing, Jimmy was smiling, relaxed, looking toward the horizon. This is how I always remember him, Harold said. Not in his last moments, but like this, looking forward, full of hope. It belongs with you now. William stared at the portrait, tracing his father's features with his fingertips. Thank you, he whispered. Later that night, as the gathering began to wind down, Harold found himself sitting on William's back porch with Lily, watching the stars come out. The evening was warm, with fireflies blinking in the yard and the distant sound of children's laughter drifting from inside the house. I've been thinking, Harold said, about the title of Jimmy's journal entries. August 10th, 1944, just a date. Not day 243 of the war or the day before the battle. Just an ordinary day that turned out to be one of his last. What about it? Lily asked. We never know which day might be our last or someone else's last, Harold said thoughtfully. Jimmy didn't know he only had 5 more days to write in that journal. He was still planning for the future, still dreaming. Lily nodded, understanding in her eyes. I spent 75 years avoiding his grave because I couldn't face the fact that he was gone, Harold continued. But being here, meeting his family, seeing how his life extended beyond his death, I realize now that he never really left. Not completely. The screen door opened and William stepped out onto the porch. Mind if I join you? Please. Harold gestured to the empty chair beside him. The three sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds. I've been thinking, William finally said. Tomorrow is Sunday. Your flight back isn't until the afternoon, right? Harold nodded. Would you come with us to Arlington one more time? William asked. The whole family wants to go. It would be the first time we've all been there together. I'd be honored, Harold replied. The next morning, a caravan of cars made its way to Arlington National Cemetery. Harold rode with William and Lily, his heart lighter than it had been in decades. When they reached Section 39, the family gathered around Jimmy's grave, 4 generations standing together, from William at 81 to the youngest great-great-grandchild at just 6 months old. Harold stood before the headstone one last time, supported by Lily on one side and William on the other. The small photograph he had placed there on his first visit was still there, but now it was accompanied by fresh flowers brought by the family. We came to say goodbye properly, Jimmy, Harold said softly, and to say thank you. Look at what you started. He gestured to the assembled family. Your life was short, but your legacy is long. These people are here because of you, because of what you believed in, what you fought for, and what you saved. William stepped forward and placed a hand on the white stone. Thank you, Dad, for my life, for everything. One by one, the family members came forward to touch the headstone, to murmur their own private words to the man they had come to know through Harold's stories. Even the smallest children were lifted up to place their tiny hands on the cool marble, creating a connection between past and future. As they prepared to leave, Harold turned for one last look. "Goodbye, my friend," he said. "I'll be seeing you again before too long, I expect. Save me a spot on that porch of yours."